Geography and You presents.
Hello and welcome to Death by Fahrenheit, a podcast series by Geography and You Live that investigates the rising tide of extreme heat across India. I'm Hiteshika, your host. As temperature records topple and new regions fall prey to scorching conditions, understanding the science of heat waves becomes more urgent than ever. In this episode, we turn our attention to the data, definitions, and the deepening vulnerabilities. Joining me is our discussant, Dr. Sulagna Chattopadhyay, Editor in Chief of Geography in You, who has long chronicled India's evolving climate narratives. We are honored to welcome Dr. S.C. Bhan, a veteran meteorologist who has served as senior scientist and head at the Indian Meteorological Department for over 3 decades. Currently associated with the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India, Dr. Bhan brings an exceptional depth of experience in operational meteorology and disaster risk reduction. Let's begin this vital conversation. Over to you, Dr. Chattopadhyay.
Thank you, Hiteshika, and welcome, Dr. Bhan. So, just let me right away go to your study. So, you have this a lot of studies actually on hot days in Delhi, Bhubaneswar, Rajkot, etc., and you see a change. So, my first question is on climate change. Tell our listeners and tell us how much is there a climate change impact and how much?
Yes, particularly speaking in terms of heat wave, what we are discussing today. Climate change has impacted the occurrence of heat and high temperature in two ways. Number one, the average temperatures are increasing, so the entire days are getting heated up. Even the coolest temperature of the day are now much warmer than what they used to be 20 years ago. The other is that number of very hot days, which we quantify or term as heat waves. Number of such days are also increasing, primarily because of the climate change and the global warming induced by anthropogenic emission of greenhouse gases.
How much is this rise, sir? What is the percentage? Like, we know that globally 1.5, we have reached 1.5. So if you have to count the number of hot days in a year, so by how many factors has that increased?
The number of heat wave days, if we on an average, if we see across the country, most of the stations in core heat zones used to get about 6 to 7 days of heat waves during the summer season. Now those have reached about 9 to 10. So they have become 1.5 times what they used to be about 30 years ago. And still they are increasing. That's a point of worry.
So that's pretty much. I mean, if you it's like so many days in such a short span of time. So what does that mean really? If you talk about like this, bring in the first people, and then if we can bring in agriculture, and then of course the web of life. So if we can bring this impacts, so tell us first people. So what is the impact on people? And if we say that so there is the number of people who are exposed to more heat, like average temperatures you said are increasing, which means probably, if I'm incorrect, kindly correct me, that minimum temperatures like the night temperatures, so nights are hotter while nights should have been cooler. I think that's what it means.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah. So tell me about the people. How does it impact the people?
The increased temperature impact people primarily in two ways. Number one are direct health impacts, which includes various stages of impacts are there. There's heat syncope and then heat exhaustion and eventually leading to heat stroke if a person is exposed to excessive temperature for quite a long period. And that secondly results into many other kinds of impacts on a people, like the working hours for that person would be reduced. The overall efficiency would go down. And if there are some underlying diseases, particularly related to heart and kidneys, they get flared up in the whole seasons. So many of the mortalities which are because of heat wave are that the underlying diseases get flared up. And in some cases, the direct heat stroke is also cause of death in the people. But the morbidity related to heat is not so well quantified. So that leads to a lot of loss to the individuals and lot of burden on the health system as such.
Okay, so is this the same throughout the country? I mean, do you see this burden or the heat wave really different along the different places or?
One thing we can say it's same in the sense that relative increase is broadly the same. But there are still some areas which are those were hotter and where its impacts are becoming more serious and life threatening. In other areas where they were not realizing any heat wave earlier or hotter temperatures, they are also started realizing heat wave kind of situations. So the impacts there may not be in terms of mortality, but in terms of morbidity and work efficiency, definitely the impacts are being realized there also for the reason that population in those areas are not so well acclimatized to higher temperatures.
Okay.
So the economic impacts and health impacts are nearly similar, except that mortalities may be more in core heat zone areas, which are the northwestern parts of the country, the central India, and moving across to the eastern coast of the India.
So what is it that say if you have at the atmosphere has water, you feel hotter.
We feel hotter.
So drier atmosphere is what for a heat wave? A drier atmosphere is better. I mean, how does that work?
It works in the sense that a higher amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, that means higher humidity or higher wet bulb temperatures, they bring down the cooling capacity of the atmosphere. So human beings and other systems get cooled because of evaporation of the open water or perspiration from human beings. If there is more water in an air, that means if the humidity is more, the cooling capacity of the air comes down. And the body is not able to dissipate the heat, which leads to a feeling of higher temperature and also impacts like higher temperatures on the body.
Okay. Now, I will come back to this again. But before that, give us. We were having this discussion a little while ago about agriculture. So, if you can just tell our listeners what heat wave does to agriculture or produce.
In agriculture, the heat waves number one leads to more demand for water in the crops. So, and water for irrigation is not so freely available in the country. It's not in ample quantity available. So it leads to water shortage. And because animal husbandry is very closely related to agriculture, in fact, it is a part of agriculture in our country, there is severe drinking water supply shortage for the cattle during peak summer days. The other impact of heat wave on agriculture crops that it leads to early ripening of the crops. And a speedy ripening or ripening in a short period means the crops have less number of days available to translocate the photosynthetes, the food manufactured by the leaves and the stems, into the seeds or the reproductive parts of the area. So that leads to reduction in the yield. And any measure, even if you irrigate it, that impacts can only be minimized. It cannot be done away with in any case.
And what happens to the insects and what happens to them, because things that feed on the or grow on the crops, what happens to them?
Insect pests are emerging earlier due to hotter environment. That means they mostly get a succulent crop available to them for it. The damage is more in that crop. Number two, with increased temperature, the subsequent generation of the pests that comes earlier. At a lower temperature, suppose the next generation comes about after 20 days. In a warmer temperature, the next generation may come after 10 days only. And that generation then again multiplies in 10 days. So the rate of multiplication of the insect pests increases under warmer temperature, leading to eventually more loss to the crops.
So if you're talking about greening of permafrost areas, say, and say the Himalayan region and the glacier region, what do heat waves do to these areas? Like, what happens to the permafrost area with a heat wave condition? If the number of days are increasing, are we seeing some fallout of that?
Yeah, the impact of heat wave in those areas which are permafrost and are at higher altitude is even more than in the plains.
Okay.
If we see globally, the global temperatures, as we discussed now, have increased by 1.5 degrees so far. But in the Himalayas and other mountainous regions of the crops and Arctic and Antarctic regions, those have increased by about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
So the warming is more there. It is primarily because with increase in temperature, some of that snow, with the permanent snow, melts down. And snow, as we know, is a very good reflector of solar radiation. So the areas from where the snow is melted, they will absorb more radiation. So warming would be more there. And that will lead to further melting of the snow. So there is a positive feedback in those areas. So that will lead to more increase in temperatures, accelerated melting of the glaciers, and all as consequent impacts of that.
Okay, now that's very startling. I mean, to consider that, what is already impacted is, a certain area is going to be impacted worse.
Yes,
And
this is what the
higher.
climate scientists call a positive feedback of the heat wave.
Right. So, coming back to labor, for example, coming back to people, so some countries they have certain norms of working hours and school children and hospitals, and you were mentioning this a little while earlier. So, can you give us a sense of what this means really for us, for India? Do we have anything in place? What you've been working in this field for very long, so in terms of action or actionable things that the government can do, what is
Yes,
your view?
we can do a number of things to mitigate those impacts on particularly outdoor workers and school children. Though, as far as I understand, there are no regulations in place, but many of the agencies and municipalities and the state governments, they alter the school timings. The schools start much earlier in the day, that's around 7 o'clock, and by 12 or 12:30, the schools are off, so that the children are at home by 1 o'clock or 1:30. And part of that peak period they are able to avoid. Secondly, in school, some of the states have come out with a very good solution that within a class period of about 40-45 minutes, they go for a water bell.
Water bell.
Water bell.
Okay.
Where the students have to compulsorily drink water under supervision of a teacher so that they remain properly hydrated.
Okay.
That helps the students remain hydrated. And as far as labor and particularly the outdoor workers are concerned, some of the municipalities and the governments and even private construction managers, they regulate the hours. The day starts a bit early in the day, and during peak hours of the summer, the labor get breaks. And at the workplace, some cooling shelters and proper drinking water supply is provided to the laborers, and then they resume work after say 4 or 5 o'clock when things cool down a bit relatively. And also in between there are instruction to the labor to drink enough water, sometime mixed with salt and sugar, so that they remain hydrated. So those measures are also taken in a limited way, I would say. May not be across the construction workers, but they should be taken, and that helps to minimize the adverse impacts to a considerable extent.
But this is not by regulation.
This is not by regulations.
It's more voluntary.
It's more voluntary and also enforced by some of the district administrations. They take proactive leads.
Okay. So, I want to, Dr. Bhan, talk about the cost of this. Like, if we can bring in, because I think a lot of people understand things when they come in, figures and numbers. So, if there is a heat wave or an increased heat wave, and then followed by, say, Dr. K.J. Ramesh mentioned that there's thunderstorm and there's lightning. So the composite loss and damage is quite a bit.
Yes.
So if you can give us an idea about what does this mean if we have to put it in figure?
So we have to see it in two ways. There are costs associated with high temperatures in terms of increased expenditure on health system, on other civic amenities that primarily includes water and electricity. because electricity and water, most places are subsidized to a greater extent. So more consumption means more burden on the states and administrations. So, and also the number of work days, human work days lost because of excessive temperatures. A person cannot either go out to work during hot temperature, or he or she may fall sick for certain period of time. That time also the earnings are lost. Number two, even if there are minor illness, he or she has to spend on health protection. Also, the studies show that families have to invest more in, say, buying cold drinks or sherbets or maybe fruits which keep them cold. That expenditure goes up. So there's a tremendous amount of expenditure individuals put into it. If we address these issues through a health system and civic community authorities, we increase the investment into these sectors, it will bring down the adverse impacts on the individuals, which would have a net benefit.
But is there an exercise like this yet?
Certain sectors and in certain areas, by area I mean the geographical areas, some studies have been done, and that shows how much detrimental the heat waves are in terms of economics.
So moving on, Dr. Bhan, I wanted to know about the phenomena of the urban heat island, because as we know that the cities are hotter. I also want to know the difference between rural-urban heat distribution as such. So if you can give us a sense of the urban heat island, and do rural areas also heat up this much?
Okay. The urban heat islands are the areas within thickly populated urban areas which are relatively warmer than the surroundings, which are semi-urban or rural areas. Though the rural areas are also heating up, as the global temperature are increasing, background temperature increase, the rural areas will also get heat up. But the urban areas get additionally heated up because of very dense buildings there, tall buildings with very poor ventilation, paved roads, and these buildings lead to multiple reflections. If radiation falls on one building, it gets reflected and is absorbed by another building. Had those buildings would not be there, that radiation might have been lost to outer atmosphere. So instead, in addition to getting the normal heat, all the buildings are getting reflected heat also from one another. That leads to relatively more warming. Secondly, these urban structures, that densely populated areas, the buildings, the pakka roads, they retain more heat, and that heat is released during night time. So nights are also getting warmer. In fact, the nights are, in an urban heat island, nights are even more warmer compared to other areas than the day temperatures. So it's hotter during entire day. The heat load is never taken off the body during any part of the day. So that leads to continued heat load on human beings, on other electricity requirements, maybe increased water demands. So that phenomena is more happening in the urban areas, because rural areas are not so thickly populated, they are relatively better ventilated, not so many paved roads are there. So that phenomena is less marked in rural areas, it's more marked in the urban areas.
But we cannot not have these things, no? So what is the...
So we need to have that. We cannot do away with that. The solution is that two-way. One is the existing buildings, probably we cannot change them much. The other is the newer habitations coming up. It would be relatively easy to implement these things in newer habitation. Construct the buildings a bit apart. Orient the streets to the prevailing winds so that they are better ventilated. Leave more open areas, green areas, and maybe smaller water bodies in between. So those actions can be taken in the newly coming up habitations. In the existing areas, what we can do is, every city used to have some water bodies earlier. Those are slowly encroached upon, or then are either depleted or they don't exist at all. We need to restore those water bodies. Greening need to be increased. We need to plant more trees within the cities, because the water evaporating from the streets, those trees leads to cooling. That we should do. Others are that we need to make people aware that it's ventilation which plays very important roles, and we should ensure that whatever ventilation we can provide, a cross ventilation should be there. And there are recommendations globally after the temperature reaches certain thresholds. The table fan should be used to, exhaust the inner hotter air to the outer streets, so that the house remains cool.
So you have to pull out the air
We have
from
to
the
pull
home.
out that air which has become heated inside to outside. Those recommendations have to find place. So in addition to greening, restoration of water bodies, and also the cool roof initiative that is taken by certain cities and municipalities, that leads to very significant cooling in the house. So cool roof by either by painting or by reflective tiles or certain other cooling material that helps bring down the temperatures.
Dr. Bhan, after speaking with you, I'm getting a sense that I'll come to also the action plans, the heat action plans that cities have, and I'll ask you about that. But before that, I want to bring in here that I get a sense that this is a very individual, individual, what should I say, momentum with heat wave that people build up on their own. So there'll be a sensitive person who will come along and say, okay, let us do some let us give the labor a little respite in the middle of the day. Then somebody else will come along and say, okay, let's make it a holiday for the students. There is no real regulation, and there is a general apathy. Like you're talking about ventilation in homes, you're talking about not encroaching water bodies in cities. I mean, there is so much apathy towards climate or anything that is environment in this country. So where do you really see, I mean, how do we get from, where do we go from here?
I put it this way: instead of apathy, it's a lack of awareness
Okay.
among the individuals and also among the planners and the policy makers. They need to be more sensitive that if we invest in greening of the cities, restoration of water bodies, it would lead to less burden of their health system. So whatever they are spending on the mitigation measures would give them more rewards on less expenditure on the health system, maybe on power consumption, maybe on water, electricity. So that awareness has to come. And also, as you very rightly told, we should have a regulation which provides that after the temperature reaches a certain threshold or a certain kind of forecast is received from IMD, action 1, 2, 3 should be automatically taken by the local authorities. They should not wait for the orders to come from the higher ups. So that has to be factored in our regulation mechanism.
Okay. Now tell us about the heat action plans, of India as a whole. How many do we have?
Because different states have different impacts of heat, different states have their own heat action plans. There is no pan-India heat action plan. There are guidelines. National guidelines are there, formulated by the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority. They formulate guidelines, but the action plans are of individual states. So all the heat-impacted states, which are about 23 or 24 in number, they have the heat action plans. And about 300 cities and districts also have their heat action plans. And the action plans primarily include some quantification wherever the data are available of the impact of the heats, and then what different agencies should do in case of a heat wave, where the people can get the heat wave warning from. And also for some authorities, how to disseminate those heat wave warnings and advisories. So as far as IMD is concerned, they give very gross impacts also. But what is more needed is that based on the advisories and forecast, very specific advisories to different vulnerable groups should be formulated by the domain experts. Say for health, the health experts. On water, the water expert. How much impact would it have and what should they do to minimize those impacts. And if we come to finer sectors, say for health, same temperatures would have different impact on people having different vulnerabilities.
Correct.
Those having different exposures, living in different kind of areas, of different ages. And studies found that women are more vulnerable to higher temperatures.
Oh.
Yeah. And within women, the lactating mothers and pregnant women are even more vulnerable. So advisories specifically tailored to those groups should be formulated, along with the measures they can take, or the system assistance which is available to them, where and how can they avail it. Those awareness has to, where are the cooling centers located in the city, what are the health centers where specific heat wards are there, how they can call the ambulance in case of somebody, and how to identify the heat related symptoms. That is really important. We should be able to identify the symptoms at home. This is heat related symptom, and then these are the resources I can take help of, and how to approach those resources. So that awareness and education has to come at a mass scale. That is important.
So yeah, I suppose when you know the importance of that, then you would take action, climate action. Dr. Bhan, tell us something. Give us an idea about this wet bulb thermometer. Like, what is the significance of it? Should we use it? Should we not use it? Should it be part of the parameterization that IMD does?
No, but you are absolutely correct. The wet bulb thermometer is a very important measurement in terms of heat, in the sense that a higher wet bulb temperature would mean the cooling capacity of the air through evaporation of either human skin or from vegetation and trees goes down at higher wet bulb temperatures. So the information of wet bulb temperature is important, because the higher wet bulb temperature would lead to greater feeling of heat at same temperatures. So temperature at 40 degrees Celsius would feel like 45, 46 at higher wet bulb temperature, and it may feel even 38 if wet bulb temperatures are lower, because that will lead to more cooling of the skin by evaporation. So it's an important parameter, and IMD is factoring it into it to some extent in the terms that it is also providing information on humidity. So wet bulb eventually translates into humidity.
Yes.
So humidity information is now being provided by IMD after the user demands came from different sectors.
Okay, so tell us about IMD's packages. So maybe that could be your concluding remark about the preparedness of what is the services that IMD offers and how that helps with preparedness.
IMD, as we know, is the National Meteorological Agency, and it's primarily responsible for forecast and warnings. And for warning on any event, we need to quantify it. So IMD has a definition of heat wave. So primarily based on actual temperature, threshold of a temperature, and its deviation from the averages for that time of year. So depending on geography of the country, IMD declares heat wave when temperatures reach at least 40 degrees Celsius in the plains, 37 degrees Celsius in the coastal areas, and 30 degrees Celsius in the hilly areas, depending upon acclimatization of the people and moisture distribution across the areas. And having reached those temperatures, the temperature should also be above normal by at least 4.5 degrees from the average of that time for it to qualify to become a heat wave. That's the criteria. So because for declaring we need a criteria, so there is a criteria. Also, if temperature reaches 45 degrees Celsius, irrespective of deviation, it is called a heat wave. And at 47, a severe heat wave. Then IMD, based on duration of heat wave, probable duration of heat wave, and these temperatures, provides heat wave warnings in 3 color-coded systems. A yellow code, it's a mild heat wave, mild impact only on those who are vulnerable. Then there's a moderate heat wave, it's orange color warning. It can have impacts on even healthier human beings if exposed for a longer time. And then there is a red warning, red alert, which is dangerous for anybody exposed to heat wave. So IMD provides the color-coded warning in these 3 ways at district scale.
Okay.
And also for about 1,000 cities across the country. So, and these are provided primarily to the states and the district administration, which based on their areas then take further actions. Also, some of the cities, started with Ahmedabad first, have come out with their own thresholds. See, Ahmedabad came out at 41 degrees Celsius, the ill impact of high temperature start. At 43, the impacts start increasing at a higher rate, and after 45, they're very high impacts. So they came out with their own thresholds of 41 degrees Celsius for a yellow alert, 43 degrees Celsius for a orange alert, and 45 degrees Celsius for a red alert. So whichever cities have come out with such thresholds, those cities are also provided by forecast by IMD into those color codes so that they take appropriate actions.
Okay, that was great, and unfortunately we have to close it here. But thank you so much for your time, Dr. Bhan, and we had a very fantastic time with you. Great discussion. Closing comment.
Thank you very much. So, in the end, I would say it's the education and awareness we should promote the first. We should know how I'm going to impacted by the heat wave, where can I get the warnings from, and what are the resources available me to mitigate the ill impacts. That's the foremost point we can do without a great investment into it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chattopadhyay, and our sincere thanks to Dr. S.C. Bhan for bringing clarity to this increasingly complex hazard. From differentiated regional thresholds to incorporating urban heat dynamics and the urgent case of using wet bulb temperature as a health metric, this episode has laid bare how science must shape response. As the climate continues to destabilize, heat waves will not just intensify, they will surprise us, emerging in new geographies and testing the limits of preparedness. But with data-driven forecasting, early warning systems, and robust interagency coordination, we can move from reaction to resilience. Join us in the next episode of Death by Fahrenheit, where we continue to examine the human, ecological, and systemic costs of rising heat. A detailed blog of this podcast will be soon uploaded on www.geographynU.com. Don't forget to check it out. Follow us on Spotify, Instagram, and YouTube so that you never miss an episode. Until then, take care of yourself and others, and remember, awareness is the first step toward adaptation.